Hi, everybody. This is Marie from the Innovation Group. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Emerging Leaders Post-Election Gaming webinar, also produced by the American Gaming Association. We have a unique and exciting setup today in that all of the panelists are physically at the same location, the AGA office in DC. So in order for you to see who's speaking, you're going to want to go full screen on them, and here are some slides showing you how to do that. Please wait until the slides are finished before you start following the steps, since once you go full screen, you won't be able to see the slides anymore. So you should be able to now see step number 1, which I'm sharing. It shows the camera box on the right with the blue double arrow icon that says View All Participants if you hover over it. You'll click on those blue arrows and come to step number 2, which shows the camera box now in the middle of your screen. Again, there will be blue arrows at the top right corner of it, and you'll click on those. They say full screen when you hover over them. After you click on those, the panelists should be in full screen view. Step number 3 shows how to exit full screen mode, and that's done easily by, again, clicking on the arrows at the top right corner. You'll also notice that if you hover your mouse at the top middle section of your screen, you'll see access to the Q&A button, which is how you can ask questions. And step number 4 shows how to ask a question. You'll click on the Q&A icon until it's blue or enabled, and you should see the Q&A drop-down options at the bottom right portion of your screen. Go ahead and select Ask All Panelists so that both myself and the panelists can see your questions. We'll set aside some time at the end to address as many questions as we can. And if you're attending via mobile phone and you want better to see the panelists, just double tap their camera window and it should go full screen. Also, if you encounter any technical problems amidst this webinar, stand assured that a recording of it will be posted on our Emerging Leaders page within the next few weeks. So that's our speed round tech run through, and now we go to Whit for introductions.
Well, Marie, thank you very much, and I'm glad you're in charge of all those technical requirements, because I don't think any of us here at the table would be much help on that front. But I'd like to welcome everyone who has taken time to hear us today to the Emerging Leaders webinar, where we're going to spend some time talking about what happened last week and how it relates to gaming. As Marie mentioned, the webinar is being brought to you by the Innovation Group and the American Gaming Association, and I'm Whitaker Askew, Vice President of Government Relations for the AGA. This session is part of the Emerging Leaders webinar series, which we're excited to continue into 2017. The Emerging Leaders of Gaming is the go-to network for young professionals assuming the next generation of leadership in gaming, entertainment, hospitality, food and beverage, tourism, and leisure. And I'm also excited to tell you that this particular session has received a record number of RSVPs, which must mean that you are interested in what happened last week, and we hope through some of the experts here to be able to shed some light on last week's election results and what it means not only for this country, but for the gaming industry. So with that, I guess the easiest way to kick things off before I introduce our panelists is last week actually happened. And I think most of us are still trying to pinch ourselves to see if what we saw last week is in fact reality. We obviously had perhaps the most unpredictable election season of our lifetime, and after last week's results have proven to be the most unpredictable election outcome in American history. We've gone from years of divided federal government to now one-party control of both legislative chambers in Washington and, of course, the executive branch. There are 5 gaming states who elected new governors last week, and the voters elected 86 of the 99 state legislative chambers across the nation, including changes in gaming states such as Iowa, Minnesota, Nevada, and New Mexico. And what does it all mean for the gaming industry? The good news is my friends here to my right are going to talk to you about that. And I think time will tell ultimately, but one thing is certainly clear. President Trump, his administration, the United States Congress, and state elected officials will unquestionably shape important policies that will directly impact our industry for years to come. Now, there's good news with all of that unknown. First, gaming is undeniably an economic and community engine in 40 states across the United States. We offer first-class entertainment experiences that consumers want and have demonstrated that through participation. And also, public opinion proves that gaming is mainstream. Gaming has a 90% approval rating as an acceptance and form of entertainment amongst American voters. So this really all comes together to create a solid foundation that AGA and you on this webinar have to build from. And looking ahead, AGA expects to lead the gaming industry ahead in advocating for pro-business policies that promote growth and reinvestment. We also expect to support economic policies that provide consumers with greater confidence and discretionary income to spend money in our facilities with first-class entertainment that you're providing. Of course, we continue to welcome an environment that spurs foreign visitation, and AGA's first and foremost job is to advance a pro-gaming agenda, such as repealing the failed federal sports betting prohibition that's been on the books for nearly 25 years and has clearly failed consumers and the intent back in 1992. So one thing's crystal clear. These new opportunities and how our industry engages in educating elected officials and telling the story that we should be proud to tell will, in fact, help shape policy in the future, because perception shapes policy. And so to talk about some of the dynamics of what we already know and what we can perhaps anticipate as a result of last week's elections, we are really, really fortunate to have three of the foremost experts, not only in Washington politics and process, but also in understanding the gaming industry, having served in varying capacities in representing gaming interests. So to my right, I'll introduce, and then we'll move into questions, Arlene Martin, who is the president of Spirit Rock Consulting with decades of D.C. experience, being a former political appointee and assistant secretary at the Bureau of Indian Affairs. She's also one of, if not the foremost expert in tribal law and tribal gaming policy. So Arlene, welcome. Thanks for taking time. Thank you. To her right, we have Kurt Blaylock, who is a founding partner of Fierce Government Relations. He's no stranger to Washington politics on the Republican side of the aisle, having served in the administration for President George W. Bush, being liaison to the U.S. business community, being a senior advisor of the Republican National Committee, the U.S. Department of Education, and working on several U.S. presidential races, in addition to being one of the greatest Republican lobbyists in Washington. So, Kurt, welcome. We're glad to have you here to give your view on the Republican side of the aisle. And, of course, last but not least, we have Shanti Stanton, who is a principal with subject matter, who also has decades of experience in Washington, where she became quite prominent in being the floor chief for, at that time, House Democratic leader Dick Gephardt. She is a respected Democrat lobbyist in Washington, having represented a range of business clients, including gaming. So we really are fortunate to have what I think is the best assembly of folks we could have to present to you. So with that, I'd like to invite each of you to kind of take a deep breath, let me take a deep breath, and just kind of let them know what on earth we saw happen last week, or in your thoughts.
Well, I don't know that I can add to everything that we've heard over the last week about it. I mean, this is an election that people are going to be writing about and talking about for years to come, but I think what I've taken away from it is really that you can't account for the emotional reaction that voters have for a particular candidate and how that really converts into a motivation to go out and vote. And I think that is most basic is what happened last week. And it was, obviously, people call it seismic, but it was profound in the effects.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that the pollsters, the pundits, everyone, official Washington, shocked by the results. I think that it's clear that the American voter made a decision for a new direction as opposed to what would be a continuation of the current direction they were on. I think they were willing to, we're on an American Gaming Association call, so I'll use this pun, but I think they were willing to gamble what comes next by electing Donald Trump because they're looking for something different. I think that people are hurting and they are fed up with Washington and what goes on here, and they saw something in Donald Trump that they saw in no other candidate. And so at the end, when people went into that polling booth, whether or not they were undecided or whether or not they were not sharing who they were going to vote for, they decided at the end overwhelmingly at that moment to move towards Donald Trump's camp. And that's what put him over the edge. Clearly, it was in key states that typically Republicans don't win, be that Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, et cetera. But I think that noise was heard resoundingly clear across the country, but also here in Washington, where people have the understanding that the American voters and the president-elect are looking for results quickly and expeditiously, and that they want to see some points put on the board that will help their lives be better.
Shanti, there's probably no one more surprised than you and your colleagues as a result of last week. What do you make of all of it?
Yeah, I guess we do agree sometimes, because I actually agree with what Kurt just said. I think it's obvious this was a change election. 70% of the electorate was not for the current status of Washington, and when you are facing that, you certainly have an uphill battle. And her job was to go out there and prove him as an unacceptable alternative, which she did, but I think ultimately it just didn't matter. People wanted whatever wasn't currently there. And I think, moving forward, I think it's time for my party to regroup, maybe find some new and younger charismatic blood moving forward. And I think, ultimately, whether you like it or not, the voter is generally right.
I've always thought of you as young and charismatic. Maybe you've got a future. You never know.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So before we get more into both the presidential as well as the congressional implications for gaming, let's talk about where gaming is amongst the voters out there. And I mentioned the fact that we enjoy a 90% approval rating amongst American voters. What do we think has led to this mainstream evolution, where I suspect multiple years ago, but not that many, perhaps the industry was less understood by the American electorate, particularly when our footprint wasn't as large as it now is in 40 states. What do you think has led to gaming becoming more mainstream? And then I'll follow that up with what work needs to be done to ensure that policymakers follow the mold of the voters in understanding this industry. Anybody want to take that?
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, I think part of it, to be honest, is just that there is some stricter regulation, and so people feel more comfortable using this as sort of more of a mainstream form of entertainment. I think if you go to Las Vegas and some other areas where there are casinos, there are really nice hotels now, and there are nice restaurants and shopping, and it's a sort of a more broad sort of entertainment experience. I think people appreciate the possibility of having personal choice, and I think now they're able to have that with some protections for the people that, worry more about regulation. I think it's a lot of the legwork that you all have been doing and that, Whit and others have been doing here, and just educating people on the jobs and the revenue and, the community involvement that a lot of these casinos have, and I think it's finally started to resonate.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm jotting down notes here because I think another piece of this, and maybe it's a result of what you just said, Shanti, but you look at what just occurred this year alone in Las Vegas alone, which obviously the gaming industry is much more than that, but there was a presidential debate in Las Vegas. We now have a president-elect who is a former casino owner. 4 of the 17 fundraising lieutenants on the inaugural committee are casino owners. The NHL is coming to Las Vegas. The NFL is considering it. These are the types of things that I think our industry, regardless of who won last week, should start using to tell that story that we are a job-creating economic engine providing entertainment and should be treated the same way as any other business that does that. So I'd like to transition into what does industry need to be thinking about in terms of the new electorate. We have a Republican House, a Republican Senate, perhaps who don't understand gaming the way that they will once we've done our job. But how do we use some of these things that are out there coupled with the electoral mood to start advancing our agenda before we talk, the actual nitty-gritty of policies and so forth?
Yeah, great question, Whit. And I think on top of what Shanti said, one of the reasons why we're becoming more successful and accepted is because we're not just a one city or two state industry. We are all across the country, 40 states plus and adding, and the footprint, the economic footprint and the jobs footprint of the industry is so enormous that people understand and they see it, because it's not only something they like to go do maybe when they travel to go to Las Vegas, but it's also something that they see in their backyard. They understand that there are casinos down the street. We in Washington have a $1 billion project going in Maryland, just miles from the Capitol. And so people understand what that means, not only for their families, but also economic development of jobs in the community and economic growth. And so I think that's something that we have to continue to expand upon. Clearly, the message from this election is that there are many voters who feel like that the economy has been stagnant, there's been no growth, it's hard to pay their bills, it's hard to pay their health insurance, and they're looking for a way forward, and they're looking for the government, instead of to put additional burdens on them, to unleash the economy so the economy can grow. We're a growing part of that economy. We're a growing part of the jobs picture in this country. And so I think as we expand our footprint and we grow our businesses, we have an advantage in that discussion because we're a part of the economy getting back on track.
Yeah, and you know, when you think about our industry, and certainly the members of Congress that I think we all talk to don't necessarily differentiate between commercial gaming and tribal gaming. And you know, I think what's going to be important for our educational efforts moving forward is AGA represents the totality of the gaming industry and works in a very productive and positive way with NIGA. How can we work together to help tell that story, you know, in terms of commercial and tribal gaming? Because a lot of the issues that are on the legislative agenda and perhaps will be on the president-elect's agenda impact gaming regardless of who provides it. So what are your thoughts on how we start to work more collaboratively as an industry, particularly with tribal gaming now being part of AGA?
Right. Well, I think, you know, up until very recently, tribes have been extremely active in Washington, and particularly with regard to advocating for themselves and the tribal gaming industry. And I think one of the things they've done very well up to now is to be able to tell their story, which I think is the story of all commercial gaming and tribal gaming alike, which is the positive effects that gaming has in the local community. For tribes in particular, what they've done is they've been able to show to their delegations, to their members, that they're a positive economic force, not just on the reservation, but in their communities, that they provide jobs, not just for tribal members, but for non-tribal members, but that they also they hire other businesses. They need printers. They need people to provide linens. They need people to provide food. So they've been really good at telling that story and really bringing it local and something that's visible to their members. I think in working together, which is something we've started to do, you know, telling that story across the entire country, across all forms of gaming, is going to be something that is going to be, when taken all together, you know, you can't avoid it. I mean, the positive implications that gaming has on the ground. So I think that's one area where we can really work together. I think when we look at our issues that we have in common and walking together as an industry, you know, that is a very forceful story that can be, you know, that we can tell very well.
Of course, the other incredibly important segment is the manufacturing and supply side, which I bet if you polled the average member of Congress, whether they were just first elected last week or have been around for a while, don't associate or think about high-tech engineering, software engineers, programmers, and so forth being associated with the casino gaming industry as well. I think that only adds value to what we're trying to do, particularly as we move into the dawn of a new era in the United States Congress. Obviously, Senator Harry Reid chose not to run for re-election, and come January 3rd will not be in the United States Senate. Now, I've read plenty of articles, I'm sure many of you have as well, that automatically means the sky is falling for our industry. think we sitting here and others in Washington representing gaming may take a bit different view. And sure, that could present some challenges, but it also creates incredible opportunity for this industry to build and cultivate new champions in that geographic footprint that we enjoy beyond Nevada. And so that's how AGA has chosen to look at this unknown, uncharted territory in working with folks like Senator Heller and Congresswoman Titus from Nevada, but building out from that. That's something we're focused on. And quite frankly, with new members of Congress who were just elected last week and are now in Washington this week asking, how on earth did I get here, for their new member orientations, we are already on a bipartisan basis working the process to help educate them and get our foot in the door so that they understand us out of the gate. So I guess, Kirk, Shanti, my question for you is, how should this industry be going about its business in this new era that has now dawned?
Yeah, I mean, I think people sort of think of Reed as the only person that protected Nevada, and it's true that he did protect Nevada, but I think there are a lot of issues that are emerging and have sort of been sort of on the table for the last couple of years, like online poker and sports betting, that he wasn't necessarily for. So I think that as far as like moving forward, we have so many opportunities with Schumer, and every new member that has come in is an opportunity for us to tell our story. And I actually think that this was almost the perfect time for Reed to leave, because it moves gaming from Nevada to more of a nationwide issue.
I think that's right, because this is a nationwide industry, and I think it's important to unleash that and to allow for other people to come in and pick up the mantle and be champions for the industry. Not only does it allow people like Dean Heller to do that, but it allows people across the country who are in different states who have huge casino interests in their states to do more, and we should be asking them to do more. Again, with the new administration coming in and a Republican Congress, they're going to be looking to put points on the board sooner rather than later. And one of the most important points on the board is economic growth. And we're a huge part of that story, and we have to be telling that often and to as many people as we can be.
Yeah, and I think this is where the collaboration with tribes can really be extremely valuable, because, you know, tribes have been doing that locally since the beginning. And we can kind of take from that playbook and add on to it, coordinate in those ways.
I would like to talk a bit more about some of the dynamics in Congress, but my guess is you were paying a little more attention to what was happening in the White House at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. And so let's talk about that for a moment. President-elect Trump is a former casino owner. He builds beautiful buildings. And in fact, I had dinner in his newest hotel in Washington last night. And for those of you who go to Vegas, you see his building there on, or almost on the Strip. How does this and his mindset and understanding the gaming industry impact gaming, recognizing that perhaps gaming isn't, you know, it's not healthcare, it's not tax reform in terms of some of the big national issues that typically are on presidents' agendas, but how do you think gaming fits into a President-elect Trump administration? Kirk?
So I think that the best answer is we don't know yet. As you might expect on most answers at this point, we don't know. As the transitions itself, with Vice President-elect taking charge of the transition as of last Friday, and changes are afoot in that respect. Gaming is not something that they talked about in terms of a top priority issue, obviously, because he ran on specific items that included repealing the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. He ran on building a wall on the border of Mexico. He ran on jobs and infrastructure, and he ran on being against the Washington machine. As you've heard him say, he's draining the swamp. So we don't know the answer. What we can do is we can speculate on what the answer is. And the speculation would be that in large part he is going to be very much a pro-economic growth, pro-jobs, less regulation type of president, and he will be nominating and putting forth candidates to be in the departments and agencies who will follow out on that overall theme. Secondly, what we do know is he does understand the industry. He has worked in the industry. He has built casinos. He has run casinos. He has built hotels. He runs hotels now currently until he turns over the power of the Trump organization to his family members. So what we do know is he comes to the table with a really good, solid understanding of how the industry works and what can work and what some of the challenges are for the industry. So one would hope, and again, speculate, but one would hope that coming to the table with that type of knowledge that we would have a more favorable environment. But again, that's speculation because at the end of the day, we just don't know yet.
And it's interesting you highlight maybe a more favorable regulatory environment. For those of you who don't come to Washington often, you may be asking, why are we even talking about the federal government? Because gaming is primarily licensed, regulated, and taxed in the states, with the exception of the respect of sovereign tribal governments and the need for communications at the federal level. But I think the regulatory point is that answer. The fact is, gaming is increasingly under the radar through some of the federal agencies, whether it be the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network within the U.S. Treasury, or certainly the Interior Department and decisions that are made there for land in the trust, which have direct implications for tribal gaming. Certainly the Department of Labor and some of the regulations that have come there on overtime pay and other requirements. So the fact is, because gaming is such a major economic engine nationally, it by proxy means that federal decisions in the regulatory agencies impact us as well, sometimes even directly. So I think that will be an area that, if your speculation is correct, this industry should be excited about, because we certainly deal with our share of regulation in the states, and we don't need onerous regulations at the federal level to make our jobs harder.
I think that's exactly right, and I think that the scope of the regulatory pen in Washington has been growing, and we've seen additional actions at the Federal Trade Commission, at the Consumer Protection Bureau, the CFPB, and other places that could impact the business operations of the gaming industry in a negative way. And so I think that changing that dynamic of the regulatory environment to free up new and onerous regulations in a variety of areas is something that will be positive for the industry going forward. Secondly, I think that potentially his focus on infrastructure, particularly as he's talked about airports and bridges and roads and jobs, could be beneficial to many locations where there are casinos and gaming operations, where the airports might be outdated or the roads and bridges around the facilities that we have might be outdated. There's lots in here that could be beneficial to the industry, even though it may not directly seem like it is.
That's a great point. Ari, let me ask you, in terms of the unique relationship between tribal governments being sovereign and their engagement, not only with the NIGC, but through the Interior Department, we're going to have a new Interior Secretary. We're going to have a new Bureau of Indian Affairs Assistant Secretary. You know, not exactly sure what happens at the NIGC. What are your thoughts in terms of Trump's historical stances on tribal gaming and what a Trump administration looks like in terms of its relationship with sovereign tribal governments?
Well, I don't know how many of you have seen some of the comments that President-elect Trump has made particularly in the mid-'90s with respect to tribal gaming. If we were to go by those comments alone, I think that there would be significant concern, I think, within the tribal gaming industry about what might happen moving forward. But that was a long time ago. It was over 20 years ago, and we have some anecdotal evidence that he's changed his position with regard to his statements that he believes that tribal gaming is rife with organized crime and isn't really operated by Indians.
Neither of which are true.
Neither of which are true, absolutely not. But we do have some anecdotal evidence that he has said to individuals in private meetings that, you know, that was the Donald Trump that was competing with these casinos at the time, and that, as we all know, he's a fierce competitor and will go to great lengths to win at any cost. But that's all changed now. He's not a competitor anymore. He's the president. And so I think that there's some hope that, that with respect to those personnel decisions, that it will still be, he'll conform with what his responsibilities are as president and make good choices with regard to those choices and, implement a policy that reflects what his responsibility is as president. But, I mean, all of this is still not known. As Kurt said, we just don't know because the transition is kind of in transition, what those picks are going to be. So until we know more about, in particular, who the Secretary of Interior is going to be, how active they'll be on tribal issues, and then who that Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs will be, we just don't know until those picks are made.
The good news in that scenario is that at least until we know differently, we have to take the president-elect at his word, which I do, which is he's going to be the president of all Americans, and he wants to make sure that all Americans benefit. I assume that would apply to tribal nations as well. And any nominee that goes before, for the president, that goes up to the Congress to be adopted in the Senate, whether that be the Secretary of the Interior or the Bureau of Indian Affairs Assistant Secretary, those candidates will go through a lengthy process that will involve the United States Senate, and there will be confirmation hearings as well as interviews, private interviews by all the members of the relevant committees, and there'll be ample opportunity for many questions to be asked and answered before any of those candidates are accepted and his nomination or his or her nomination is approved by the United States Senate. So I think we have to do a little bit of our homework as well as we go through that process to make sure that those candidates are asked the appropriate questions about the industry and their views on the industry going forward. So I do think we have a good opportunity to do that.
I'd like to shift gears back to the congressional dynamics and want to bring in Shanti for her thoughts. I think obviously with Senator Mitch McConnell from Kentucky maintaining his majority leader's role, I think we understand how he operates given the last couple of years in the Senate. I think what we should talk about here, and Shanti would welcome your thoughts, is what does a Senator Chuck Schumer, minority leader, look like in terms of working with Senate Republicans, working with House Republicans, and President-elect Trump? And perhaps his approach is maybe a little different or could be a little different than what Senator Reed's has been in terms of governing. What are your thoughts on Chuck Schumer and how he operates in the Senate?
I mean, Chuck is very smart. As Senator Corker said the other day, I believe he got a 1,600 on his SAT. So in that respect, he is very well regarded on the Republican side in both bodies. I think he is known as a deal maker. He is staunchly supportive of his home state, as Reed was, and that will continue to be his top priority. He also has 25 of his members up in 2018, 10 of which came from states that Trump won. So that will be his second priority, is making sure they are not taking tough votes. So to the extent he can do those things and also make deals, I think he absolutely will do that. And I don't know about Mitch McConnell, but I know further down the dais he is very well respected. And I think, Paul Ryan, I worked with him when I was working for Gephardt in the House. He's a decent, smart guy, and if they can, come to terms on substance, I think they're both willing to do that, and there's a lot of respect between the two of them.
Yeah, I'll just add, in the last 2 years, as Majority Leader McConnell has been the leader of the Senate, the Senate, at least in my opinion, has been much more productive. It's been an open process. Amendments have been allowed on any piece of legislation moving across the floor, which was not necessarily the case when Harry Reid was the majority leader of the Senate. I think that Mitch McConnell wants to move forward and get things done. I also agree with Shanti that Paul Ryan very much also wants to move things along and move the country in the right direction. He and Senator Schumer have a very good relationship. And my guess at the end of the day, which might not surprise you, is that because Donald Trump, who ran as a Republican, who may not have been one before that, but Donald Trump, who ran as a Republican, is a deal maker at the end of the day. That's what he's known for. And I think that's one of the main reasons why the American people have hired him, because they believe that he has the ability to get something done. And in that deal-making mode, he has some very willing partners at the top of the Congress in terms of cutting a deal. Chuck Schumer loves to make a deal. Paul Ryan loves to make a deal. Mitch McConnell will make a deal. So in that construct, in terms of moving forward on the bigger issues of the day, what can be done? There's a lot on the table to get done. As many of you have seen from the news reports and from the campaigns on what's being talked about, there's a process that goes along with that. It's a process that President-elect Trump is not necessarily as familiar with as the other players on the street are, but it is something that's going to take some time. And in that discussion, what comes first, what is a priority, what can get done, what can't get done, how long will it take to get it done. At least we know with Paul Ryan, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, Donald Trump, there are people willing to negotiate with each other and come up with compromises to move positive solutions forward for the American people. So I'm optimistic that can happen.
Let me ask on the lower chamber, which I'm a product of the U.S. House. The challenge has oftentimes been internal. Perhaps some of you have heard of the Freedom Caucus, which is a group of members, several dozen, who have been a challenge for Republicans in leadership, at least to date. Does anything change in terms of their approach to governing now that you have a President-elect Trump and leaders in the House and Senate who are willing to make deals on tax reform, immigration reform, some of the issues? Does Speaker Ryan have the same challenges to govern within his own party and his own conference that he has had over the last year?
Yes, as you know, with the majority is a little bit smaller, not quite as it's only 6.
What do you mean? It's hugely smaller.
It's a little bit. It's not as small as we thought it might be a couple of weeks out from the election, where people were talking about 15 or 20 seats. But the Republicans did lose 6 seats in the election. That makes it a little bit slimmer. Does Speaker Ryan still have an issue with the conservatives in the House who were part of the Freedom Caucus? Absolutely. But it seems that for now, those concerns have been quieted just a little bit, because the Freedom Caucus is very happy that Donald Trump is the president-elect. As some of you might have seen, they unanimously elected Paul Ryan to be the Speaker for the next Congress this week in leadership elections. Normally that would not be the case. He would get a few no's in that discussion. So we have a window here, and we'll see how long that window lasts. It will be probably measured issue by issue. It won't be, an outright against Speaker Ryan across the board, but it'll depend on the issue, and it'll also depend on where President-elect Trump is. Might be able to say that, if we're in a discussion on appropriations bills in the first quarter of next year, and there is a debate about how much to give Donald Trump's administration to build the wall in Mexico, that the Freedom Caucus may be louder or quieter depending on what is happening. So I think we'll just have to watch it going forward, but I think it remains an ongoing concern.
Yeah, I'd like to pause there for those of you. In a moment, we're gonna open it up to take some of the questions that we can see on our screen here. But before we do that, I just want to ask you, if you have questions. We've already received a few, some of which I see we've already answered, which means we were on message. But please feel free to type a couple of questions, and we'll allow the last couple of minutes in a moment to try to answer some of them. So please do that now. And while you're doing that, I kind of want to go back to the gaming industry and how we navigate what you've just talked about at a high level. It's all speculation in terms of what to expect out of the White House and the administration. I think the speculation on the regulatory front is certainly an educated guess, for sure. We know perhaps what we're going to get out of the House and Senate, given some of the stakeholders and leadership. There are a lot of new members of Congress as well who will have their own views, ran their own localized races to get elected, some of which may represent gaming, some may not. having not yet done our own homework, we're not 100% sure what their foundational understanding for our industry is. But AGA in our industry has a robust policy agenda for 2017 and beyond. When we're taking our arguments against the failed federal law in PASPA and working with law enforcement and the FBI and others to highlight that there is a massive illegal gambling problem in this country, but also when we're trying to be supportive in efforts on tax reform and immigration reform and some of those other big ticket issues. How does AGA and how does this industry that's not necessarily focused on Washington each and every day navigate in a time where gaming is not front and center every single day in the eyes of lawmakers? And this is not a partisan question. We may have different perspectives as to what AGA should be doing, what the industry should be doing now to ensure that we're positioned to advance our agenda next year.
I mean, this is what we go through with every client that we represent, and I think you have to remember that things don't happen in a week or a month or even sometimes even a year. And we have all done, as I mentioned before, a lot of legwork and boots on the ground. There's really no substitution for. I think if you're looking at something like sports betting, you know, it's more of a long-term plan. There are many sort of facets involved in it, and that should be a year while they're focusing on tax reform and repealing the ACA, immigration, and bigger ticket issues, to go through and talk to the new members and the rank and file members and neutralize the ground where we need to and get support where we can. And not every one of these members is going to be working on these big ticket items, and this gives us a perfect opportunity to go through and start checking off some of those boxes and finding out really where we are.
I think in addition to that, a new administration who is actively asking people to provide, at least in the transition for now and through members, for ideas that would help economic growth and jobs move forward is an opportunity for us to point out what's important to us as an industry and what's harmful as an industry. Not only some of the regulations that Whit mentioned that are ancillary to the actual business of gaming, but are around our business operations that would be helpful to remove, but also anything else that we think that is inhibiting our advancement of our business line. I think we should also be pointing out to members, because right now they are asking for it. They want to be creative. They want to be out of the box in terms of their ideas, and they also all understand that based on the outcome of this election, that the American people and their constituents in their states and districts are expecting activity and change and growth moving forward. So I think that we need to be very proactive about giving them ideas that are worthy to consider pursuing, be them big or small.
I mean, I'm right there with Shanti. What we always do at this point in the process, at the beginning of a new Congress, a new administration, is we take the opportunity to educate and feel out where people are. And then once we can tell them where we're coming from, what tribal gaming is, how it has positive effects, feel them out for where they might be on certain issues, then tailor our message to whoever that member is, what their real priorities are. So it's exactly what you were saying as well. If it's jobs, then we can point to all the jobs we create. If it's infrastructure, say how we need infrastructure for our facilities, all those types of things. So at this point in the process, it's all about, for us, education and getting to know members.
The good news is we've got lots of ammunition to help do that education, and it's incumbent upon our industry to do that. And it's something AGA is certainly committed to each and every day, and we hope that you, watching through your computer, are also committed to working with us to do that. I'd like to shift to a couple of the questions we've received, which thank you for obliging in filling some out. We've received a lot over the last 5 minutes. Some in different zones. I think what's perhaps the best segue is the bottom one, and that it says, do you think that President Trump would be more likely to seek national resolutions to gaming industry issues, whether it be internet gaming, sports betting, or daily fantasy sports, or is his mentality going to be more focused on letting states decide? That's a good one to start.
It's a great question, and again, it's one that we don't have the answer to, but we can speculate. As Shanti knows well from when President Obama took office 8 years ago, whether it was the economic stimulus package, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, or Dodd-Frank, in large part, those pieces of legislation were written in Congress. They weren't written at the White House. They were put together by members of Congress who understand those particular issues. And so my guess is, outside of the regulatory regime, if there is going to be something on internet gaming or sports betting or daily fantasy sports, at this point, I believe it would be a congressional legislative action as opposed to an administration action. I think that would be the most likely place that would happen. As you know, it's the 25th anniversary of PASPA coming up this year. I could see where the committees of jurisdiction, the judiciary committees in the House and the Senate could hold a hearing and discussions around the 25th anniversary of PASPA on has the law worked or not worked. But that would be my guess as to where that starts. The regulatory environment that we've mentioned at Treasury and other places that we already deal with, and at the Interior Department, those will come later as we get appointees confirmed and in their seats, and that's probably something we will not see a lot of activity on until after the midpoint of the year.
Yeah, I would just add, I agree with Kirk. These usually come from Congress out and not from the White House in. But I do think that there will likely be some attention on internet gaming this year. I think you can't overlook the fact that one of Trump's largest donors is a huge casino owner and has had some friends, I know, on the Republican side in the Senate in the past, and my guess is he goes back to those people and possibly goes to Trump.
All right, we'll move on to maybe I like this question. I'm not sure how my friends here can answer it yet, which is why I'm going to ask it. There's a request to elaborate a bit more on technology, and there's reference to video entertainment displays, slot machines, computer consoles, which I'll protect my friends here. I'm not so sure that they're experts on those specific items. But in terms of technology in general, if it's okay, Melanie, I'll take a liberty, because gaming is a very innovative industry, and technology plays a role in that. But at the same time, regulation sometimes can be an impediment to innovation. We've seen that with some of the ambiguity on daily fantasy sports. There's a new conversation on esports, some of these new innovative products that could perhaps be relevant to gaming. So I don't know if any of you have thoughts in terms of technology and your understanding of how gaming utilizes it, and are there opportunities for us to take advantage of within the government. But it's an interesting thought that Melanie, you asked. You don't have to.
No, I mean, I think this is one of those issues where it's sort of up to us to make it relevant if we want to make it relevant. Yes, I'm sure that there are opportunities to promote the technology we're using and possibly to, have different regulations around it, or, I'm not sure exactly what you're looking for, but this would be one of those issues where it's up to us to get the argument, go in, make the argument, and try to see where the nexuses cross each other.
Now, I'm going to really shift gears on you now, because I can't actually see it. Mario, if you could just scroll up just a hair on the questions there. There we go. A gentleman asked a question about marijuana. And in several gaming states, including some who were on the ballot last week, marijuana was legalized. Meanwhile, it's obviously still against federal law. Do any of you here think that this is part of the electorate shifting its values, or is it just becoming over time more mainstream, much like gaming has, even though I would never compare marijuana and gaming? But the fact is, from an AML, anti-money laundering compliance perspective, and other issues that the gaming industry has to deal with in the regulatory space, I was told that if you are a legal marijuana dispensary owner in Colorado, and you come over to Nevada to gamble, because those games were were made against federal law, even though it's legal in Colorado, that could be an AML concern or a compliance concern. What are your thoughts both on kind of the perceptional views of that and then how it relates to how our industry should be thinking about these, socioeconomic shifts? It's a lot there, but
I think, yes, the electorate is shifting. However, I think that marijuana is a little bit different in the sense that they have been able to categorize themselves as a possible, having a possible medicinal help to especially a lot of cancer patients and kids. And so I think in that respect, you can't quite assume that you're going to get the same liberalization that they have been able to receive. Generally, if you have some of these changes in states, it's from having a sort of a more liberal following, like a Colorado and a California, and I think that's clearly going to carry over into the gaming industry. But I don't think it's because it's like let's lift the sin tax. It's not quite as easy as that.
Brian, can you scroll back down just to make sure we haven't missed any other questions? I think more or less, based on what we can see here, if you have other questions, by all means, we're starting to run short on our time, but we'll give you another 30 seconds or so to chime in. Based off of what I'm seeing here, we've more or less touched on some of the other issues in the regulatory agencies, talking about sports betting and the work at hand there, and tribal gaming, and President-elect Trump's views relevant to PIA. Oh, there we go.
Oh, that's a good one.
Good work. So the question is, do we think that we'll see any movement on patent or IP reform legislation in the new Congress? Good question. Go.
I can answer that one. Do I disclose that we actually work on a patent coalition that was trying to move this legislation in the last couple of years? I think the answer right now is we don't know. As you know, Chuck Schumer has come off judiciary, and Feinstein is now, or I'm sorry, Leahy and Schumer have come off judiciary, and Feinstein is now on there. So we are actually meeting next week with the various groups of the coalition to find out realistically if we are able to move forward. We would like to. As you have seen in the past, there are a lot of complicating factors and other large industries that are opposed to it, but I'm hopeful that we could do something, probably a more scaled-down version than what we had been looking for in the past couple of years.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
So I'd like to close on, unless we see another excellent question pop up. The gentleman earlier had asked, it's clear that sports betting has become a significant priority for AGA and the gaming industry, and that's absolutely true. And we're just getting started in terms of our efforts in building a stakeholder coalition and educating those policymakers as to why a change in federal law is necessary. But that does not mean that there are other issues. There are absolutely other issues that are priorities for our industry. And an AGA can certainly walk and chew gum at the same time in terms of managing important issues. And so I can assure you from AGA's perspective, when we're sitting here in AGA's office, that we are going to be focused on next generation gaming policy and bringing more efficiencies to the regulatory process, not only in Washington, but in working with industry and state regulators to ensure that over time there's efficiency there. We're going to continue working with law enforcement to differentiate between the legal, regulated, job-creating industry that we proudly represent versus the illegal, illicit gambling activities that unfortunately are in the hundreds of billions of dollars, which means that they are alive and well. So we're going to work with law enforcement to help combat illegal gambling, which has a negative impact not only on consumers, but certainly our business. We're also going to continue to work with tribal gaming on those issues that unite our industry, and there are plenty of them, whether it be IRS efforts for slot taxation and reporting of winnings there, or any money laundering compliance, or a litany of other issues. We're going to be working on those. We have been, and we're looking forward to. But certainly sports betting is the bright, new, shiny issue that we're trying to be talking about for the next year and beyond. So I don't see any other questions. I filibustered to allow you the opportunity to ask them, and you didn't take advantage of that. So with that, Marie, I think we've concluded our end of this session. And really for the attendees, would like to clue you in and be directed to a survey on the webinar. Completing this survey will allow us to continue to improve the webinar experience for you moving forward. We hope this has been informative, and we look forward to your next opportunity, and thanks for your time today. So we'll sign off here at AGA. Thank you.
Well, and thank you guys so much. This was just terrific. I just want to thank Whit, you, and all the panelists for just a phenomenal webinar today, and also let everybody on still know that we're going to be posting this audio in a couple of weeks, probably by November 30th, and you can see the URL up on the screen right now. So thanks again, you guys.
Thanks, Marie. Take care.